as if it had never existed in the first place. This had to be a coma. I had been here for so long that I lost any sense of time, and even though I had never heard of a coma like this, I couldn't think of anything else it could be. One moment, I had been standing at a bus stop, waiting like any other ordinary day, and the next, I had thrown myself in front of a truck to push a kid out of its path. And now, I was here. Endless black nothing. No pain, no fear, no sense of time passing. Just waiting. I hadn't heard of any afterlife like this either, which only reinforced the idea that it had to be a coma. Then, a voice came from behind me. It was cold, monotone, and completely indifferent. There was no kindness in it, but no cruelty either. Just a flat, unwavering presence that carried a weight I couldn't ignore. It apologized for taking so long to find me. I turned toward the voice, and the moment I did, I came face to face with something I could only describe as death itself. A massive skeleton, easily 10 feet tall, loomed over me. Hellish fire burned inside its empty eye sockets, and black smoke drifted around it, carrying faint, screaming faces that twisted together like a river forming its robes. In its left hand, it held a twisted scythe resting on its shoulder, the handle a long, slender bone topped with a skull, and from that skull's mouth extended a curved obsidian blade. I stared at it, taking everything in, and oddly enough, I didn't feel afraid. I admitted that I probably should have been scared, but I wasn't, and with that, I accepted that the coma theory was no longer an option. It observed that I was handling the news of my death well. I told it that while the news was grim, after months of isolation it was strangely comforting, especially knowing that death apparently wasn't the end. That was when it corrected me, explaining that I had been here far longer than months, and that time flowed differently in a place called Limbo. That immediately caught my attention, and I asked how long it had really been, while also questioning whether it was something like the Grim Reaper or even a god. It cut that thought off immediately, stating that it was not God, but merely an overseer. It warned me that there were others like it who had fallen into arrogance and falsely claimed divinity, and it advised me to be cautious of such beings in whatever came next. I accepted that and told myself to remember it, but what really stuck with me was something else it had said: new life. So I asked directly if that meant I was being reincarnated, and more importantly, if it was into another world. I couldn't help but imagine everything: witches, dragons, princesses, the whole fantasy package. It confirmed it without hesitation. As it spoke, it turned and began walking, and even though there was nothing but void around us, I followed. It explained that because I had been hit by a truck, some kind of law dictated that I would be sent to a new world and reincarnated rather than continuing forward. That stopped me for a moment. I questioned whether getting hit by a truck really triggered reincarnation into another world, because that sounded less like reality and more like an overused trope. It responded simply, saying that art imitates life. I didn't even know how to argue with that. Then I remembered the kid. I asked about him, wondering what had happened after I pushed him out of the way. It told me it couldn't comment on him life directly, but it assured me that I had saved him. If I hadn't acted, he would have died and been reincarnated as a child in a world far too cruel for someone alone. That was enough for me. I felt a quiet sense of relief settle in, and for the first time since all of this started, I was genuinely glad about what I had done. I introduced myself properly, realizing I hadn't done that yet. It returned the courtesy, identifying itself as the overseer of death for the world I was about to be reborn into. After that, I decided to ask the question that mattered most. In stories from my world, people who get reincarnated usually receive some kind of overpowered ability, so I asked what I would get. The answer was immediate: nothing. It told me I was quite average, though it added that because I had spent so much time in limbo, where souls normally rest between lives, my time being lost there had slightly improved my vitality. I paused, trying to process that, and then asked if that meant I was at least strong or hard to kill. Instead of answering directly, it turned toward me and leveled its scythe. The skull embedded in the weapon seemed to lock onto me, and from that angle, the black blade extending from its mouth looked disturbingly like a tongue. It felt like it was mocking me, silently laughing at the idea that I could ever defy something like death. Then it answered. 2 strikes would be enough to kill me, and the second would be a mercy. I let that sink in before admitting to myself that I really wasn't anything special. It turned away again and continued walking, stating that I was still better than most, but that all mortals eventually meet death. I couldn't help but wonder if that meant I had any chance at all of becoming a hero. It told me it didn't know, as that wasn't within its vision, but it did say that being average didn't disqualify me from that possibility. That was enough to spark a bit of hope. So I pushed further, asking if there was something like an adventurer's guild I could join. It told me that when I arrived, I would find myself in a forest east of a city called Jafe, and that if I wanted to live a life different from my previous one, there was a monster hunting guild there. Then it gave me one final piece of advice: find the deadliest person there. Not long after that, it stopped walking. Even though the surroundings hadn't changed at all, I somehow understood that we had reached the end, so this was where we parted ways. I told it that I wished it well, even if I wasn't entirely sure how appropriate that was, and I thanked it, because regardless of everything, I owed it more than I could really put into words. Then, acting on instinct, I held out my hand. For a moment, it just looked at me, as if deciding whether or not I was worth acknowledging. Then, with something that felt like a quiet sigh, it reached out and took my hand. Its touch wasn't cold like I expected, nor was it burning. It was warm. It felt like the gentler version of death that people spoke about in stories. In that moment, I could sense 3 different aspects coexisting within it: the indifferent voice, the cruel scythe, and the strangely comforting guide. It told me farewell, and it added that I should do my best to avoid it, because it hoped we wouldn't meet again for a long time. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Light flooded my vision as the sun blinded me. Wind brushed against my skin, and the scent of flowers filled the air. I could hear the sounds of nature all around me. Just like that, I had been reborn into a new world. I walked through the city streets, my eyes constantly drifting from the architecture to the wide assortment of demi-humans moving around me. When I had first arrived in the forest, there had been a skeleton nearby with an oddly well-preserved backpack. Inside, I found clothes that fit me perfectly, and I quickly understood it as a parting gift from the overseer, something meant to help me blend in. So this is the city. It looked exactly like what I would have expected from a fantasy medieval setting, with horse-drawn carriages rolling along stone roads, sturdy houses built from rock and timber, different races walking side by side, and a castle standing tall in the distance, on elevated ground. Following the directions the guards had given me, I eventually reached an intersection and glanced up at the signs overhead. The symbols were completely unfamiliar, made up of shapes in different sizes and orientations, clearly the alphabet of this world. I couldn't help but wish I could read. Even so, I kept going, doing my best to navigate by matching symbols and remembering the guards' instructions. After a bit of trial and error, a large 3-story building finally came into view. 2 griffin statues stood at the entrance. In between them hung a heavy sign carved with the same unreadable symbols, which I assumed was the guild's name. The moment I stepped inside, the foyer opened into a massive space that stretched up to the second floor. A railed gallery wrapped around 3 sides above, connecting rooms while overlooking everything below. A wide staircase split the hall down the middle, dividing the building into 2 distinct wings. To the right, there was a lively restaurant filled with movement, food being carried, drinks being served, and waitresses weaving through the crowd. To the left, the atmosphere shifted entirely. A wall was covered in papers that looked like job postings. Benches were arranged in the center, and a row of reception counters lined the far wall. There were people scattered throughout, wizards in robes, knights in armor, and others who carried themselves with quiet danger. Any one of them would have stood out back in my old world, but here, they all felt like part of the norm. So this is the Monster Hunting Guild. It really does feel like something straight out of an anime or an MMO, and everyone here looks like they belong in a fight, which just makes it harder to figure out who the deadliest person is supposed to be. I moved deeper into the restaurant, scanning the room carefully, and that was when I noticed her. She sat in the back corner, partially hidden from view. She was petite with a slim but athletic build, her figure balancing softness with lean muscle and the faint outline of abs. Her outfit was simple and flexible. A cropped tube top, fishnet sleeves, and loose pants. Her long black hair was tied into a high ponytail, with angled bangs and loose strands framing her face. She was undeniably attractive, but not fragile. Her pale skin and sharp features reminded me of moonlight reflecting off steel, and her vivid green eyes stood out against the contrast. Even without seeing any weapons, I could tell she was some kind of ninja, or at least, this world's version of one. She looked closer to a waitress than the other hunters around her, but despite that, there was something about her presence that felt dangerous. There was no doubt in my mind. I walked over and sat down at her table, and before I could even say anything, she spoke without looking up. Her tone was cold and dismissive as she asked what I wanted and called me a farm boy. I froze for a moment, caught completely off guard. I had always been more on the introverted side, and approaching a stranger like this, especially a girl, wasn't something I was used to. So this is how it starts, I thought to myself. I couldn't exactly tell her I had been reincarnated, and there was no way I could mention that death had sent me here. I introduced myself as Leon and awkwardly asked what made her think I was a farmer. She answered simply that she could tell. That only made me more confused, so I asked how. At that, she set her food down and looked directly into my eyes. Her expression stayed stern, and there was a sharp intensity behind her gaze. She explained her reasoning in a calm but cutting way. My size suggested I had consistent access to food, but my muscles showed I still did physical labor. My clothes were clean and well kept, but without any signs of wealth. And most importantly, the way I had entered the building, looking around uncertainly, too hesitant to approach the others, until I settled on her because she appeared less intimidating. It was thorough, almost uncomfortably accurate. I realized I might have hit a nerve somewhere, but at the same time, her analysis made sense. Back in my old world, I was just average, but here, even something like consistent access to food seemed like a privilege. And if she really was some kind of assassin, then reading people like this was probably second nature to her. At the very least, I noted that I could probably pass as a farmer's son if I needed to. Still, lying didn't feel like the right move here. The overseer's words echoed in my mind, steadying me. Find the deadliest person. So I decided to be honest. I told her I wasn't from a farm and that I had only visited one a few times, and then I explained that the reason I approached her wasn't because I thought she was weak, but because I had a feeling she was the deadliest person in the room. I could see a subtle shift in her reaction. She seemed pleased, even if she tried to hide it behind a hardened expression and a probing stare. She asked if someone had put me up to this. I admitted that, in a way, yes, I had come here to join the guild and become a hunter, but I had no idea how any of it worked. As she had already figured out, I was completely lost, and to make matters worse, I had no money and couldn't read. As soon as I said it, I felt the weight of how it sounded. First interaction in a new world, and I had already introduced myself as lost, broke, and clueless. Not exactly a strong first impression. Still, I pressed on, making it clear that I wasn't joking. I told her I had been instructed to find the deadliest person there, and after looking around, I believed that was her. She asked who had told me that, and I answered, a bit awkwardly, that it was Def. For a brief moment, I braced myself, half expecting things to go very badly. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her expression softening into something more neutral, as if I had genuinely caught her interest. She explained that she had been trained to analyze people, and based on that, I was either foolish, unstable, or an exceptionally good liar. Still, she decided to humor me and ask what I actually knew about hunters. That alone felt like a small victory. I gathered my thoughts and admitted that my understanding was pretty basic. Hunters took jobs to kill monsters, they used magic, and they went on adventures at least sometimes. Saying it out loud made me realize how little I actually knew. She followed up by asking if I knew my attributes or abilities. I admitted that I didn't, and that I wasn't even sure what those were. That earned a small smirk from her, like she found the situation amusing. She leaned forward slightly, clearly more engaged now. She told me I really was as inexperienced as I seemed, and explained that the guild used something called crystalline dice to measure attributes. There was a fee to use them, and if my total was high enough, I would be allowed to join. After that, I would need to pay both the sign-up fee and the first year's membership fee. I asked if that process was handled on the other side of the building, and she confirmed it. Then, since I couldn't read, she offered to point me to the right desk. She also pointed out that I had no money, and while she could cover the cost for me, I would owe her a favor in return. Her tone shifted slightly when she said that, carrying a hint of something playful but also unmistakably dangerous. It felt almost like she enjoyed the idea of having leverage, even as it served as a quiet warning. I found myself wondering if that counted as flirting, but it felt far more like a calculated risk than anything lighthearted. She was reading me completely, and I didn't really have anything to bargain with. Still, I had already decided to be straightforward with her, so there was no point in backing out now. I told her that was fine with me. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face before her expression returned to neutral. She commented that I was unusual and admitted that she didn't normally go out of her way to help people, but she would make an exception this time. With that, she stood up and started walking toward the left wing of the building, and I followed. As we moved, I realized there was one thing I hadn't asked yet, so I mentioned that I hadn't gotten her name. She answered simply, Rika. I followed Rika into the left wing of the guild hall, where a receptionist stood behind one of the counters. Rika spoke first, explaining that I was there to have my attributes and abilities checked, and that she would be covering the cost while observing. The receptionist acknowledged it and gestured for us to follow. We were led into a back hallway, and through one of the doors was a private room with a large table at its center. Shelves and bookcases lined the walls, filled with boxes that the receptionist began opening. From them, she pulled out what looked like dice, 3 with 8 sides and 12 with 12 sides, each in a different color. Rika explained that these were crystalline dice, and she pointed out that the 3 diamond-shaped ones were for attributes, mana, chi, and essence, while the 12-rounder ones represented abilities like strength and intelligence. I asked about the difference between mana, chi, and essence, trying to keep up with everything. She explained that chi was energy drawn from the body and used to enhance it, which was what she specialized in. Mana and essence were similar in concept, but since she didn't have those attributes herself, she didn't go into detail. She only mentioned that mana came from the mind, while essence came from the soul. That raised another question, so I asked if it was possible to have multiple attributes. She confirmed that it was, and added that depending on which ones you had and how much, it would influence the kind of fighting style you could pursue. Abilities mattered too, but they were easier to train, whereas attributes were more foundational. As long as you didn't have 0 attributes, you could improve. That word stuck with me. 0. I asked if that was common, and she responded with a mischievous tone, clearly enjoying the situation as she read my reaction effortlessly. She told me it was more common than not. The receptionist handed me all 15 dice, so it was possible to have no attributes at all. The overseer had said I was average, which I had assumed applied to abilities, but now I wasn't so sure. At the very least, I hoped for something. Anything. I told myself this was the moment of truth and rolled the dice across the table. They bounced and spun, each glowing in its own color before settling into place. My attributes and abilities had been decided. I focused first on the 3 8-sided dice. The blue one landed on 0. I shifted to the red one, also 0, then the green one, 0 again. My heart sank as I stared at the results. So that was it. No attributes at all. The overseer had said I had a chance, but what kind of chance did I have with nothing to work with? Rika suddenly laughed, openly amused, before composing herself and telling me not to look so defeated just yet. She pointed me toward another die on the table. On the other side, she and the receptionist were both looking at a gold-colored die that had landed on 12. The maximum value. That caught my attention immediately. If that was the highest possible result, then it had to mean something good. I asked what ability it corresponded to. Instead of answering directly, Rika poked my chest and explained that the gold die represented vitality. Everything else about me was average, but in her words, I would make an excellent punching bag. Then, almost casually, she asked if she could test that by stabbing me. I barely had time to process that before reacting in confusion. Before things could escalate further, the receptionist cleared her throat and stepped in, listing my results formally. I had 0 in all attributes and average in all abilities, with the exceptions being slightly above average intelligence and an unconfirmed vitality. She excused herself to retrieve a larger die. As she left, Rika turned back to me, clearly puzzled. She questioned how my intelligence had reached 8, especially considering that I couldn't read. I admitted that I had been a student in my previous life, which seemed to surprise her. Then I redirected the conversation, asking about the punching bag comment and why the receptionist needed another die. Rika explained that abilities for humans typically ranged from 1 to 10, and while attributes could temporarily boost them during combat, 10 was considered the natural limit. Those who exceeded their racial limits were often referred to as heroes. That made me pause. I asked if that meant I was a hero. She dismissed the idea immediately, explaining that heroes usually had most of their abilities above 10, along with attributes. In contrast, I had no attributes and only average abilities. When everything was combined, I was still about 20 points short of qualifying for the guild. To make up for that gap, my vitality would need to reach at least 32, which she compared to something on the level of dragons. That led me to another question. I asked what vitality actually represented, because even if it was health, the idea of a dragon only having 6 times the vitality of a human didn't seem right. She clarified that the scale wasn't linear. The gap between each number increased as the value rose, meaning the difference between 5 and 6 was smaller than between 6 and 7, and so on. As for what vitality itself meant, she described it as overall health, recovery, stamina, resistance to illness, and similar factors. So essentially, I was just a normal person with an unusually large health pool. The overseer had mentioned that I had spent too long in limbo, which probably explained why this was the one area where I stood out. The receptionist returned carrying a tray, and at its center was a gold 20-sided die. She told me to roll whenever I was ready. Another moment of truth. I needed that die to land on 20 so I could move up to the next tier. In games, there were plenty of characters who used their health as a resource instead of mana, so if I could get into the guild, maybe I could find a way to do something similar. I picked up the die and rolled it across the table. It moved like the others, but the light it emitted was far brighter, almost blinding. When it finally stopped, the glow faded, and I leaned forward to see the result. 20. There was still a chance. Before I could fully celebrate, I felt something press sharply into my side, nearly knocking me off balance. I turned to see Rika leaning into me, pushing a thin metal spike, about 8 inches long, against my body. I reacted immediately, asking what she thought she was doing. She stepped back casually, twirling the spike between her fingers, and explained that something strange was happening. She could pierce my skin, but at the same time, something was pushing her weapon out, as if my body was forcing it away. She noted that I didn't have chi, so I shouldn't have been able to use any kind of regeneration skill. Even so, I told her not to casually test things like that on me. She just smiled and reminded me that she had asked earlier, adding that she was simply curious. From her perspective, having such high vitality alongside otherwise normal abilities was unusual. She mentioned that while she could physically push me off balance, she couldn't actually harm me in any serious way, reinforcing her earlier point that I really was a punching bag. The receptionist cleared her throat again, drawing our attention. She explained that she would need to inform the guild master about my results, and that he would likely arrive in the afternoon to continue testing. In the meantime, she asked me to wait either nearby or in the guild hall. She then led us out of the room and back into the main foyer before giving a polite bow and leaving. Rika watched her go, then turned back to me, admitting that she had been curious about my results, and that I had exceeded her expectations. Not bad for someone she had initially written off as a farm boy. I asked if she was leaving. She confirmed that she had to go, explaining that she and her party had an important raid that night and that she had only come to the guild to pick up supplies and get lunch. Before parting, she advised me to be careful and not to trust others so easily. She also told me to share my results with her when she returned. She smiled once more before turning and walking away. I sat down on one of the benches in the center of the left wing and watched her leave, taking a moment to reflect. Rika gave off an undeniably dangerous presence, but once I got her talking, she was surprisingly approachable. She had tested my durability in a way that could have gone badly, but it hadn't felt malicious. For a first friend in a new world, she wasn't a bad outcome, and if I was being honest, she was also very attractive. I couldn't help but think back to the Overseer of Death, and quietly appreciate the situation. When I arrived at the guild hall again, it was already around lunchtime. A few hours had passed since the test, and the earlier crowd had come and gone. Now, a different wave of people was beginning to filter in for dinner, and it was during that lull that a receptionist approached and called for me. She thanked me for my patience and asked me to follow her. I did, walking once more through the back hallway, passing the same room where I had rolled the dice earlier, and continuing all the way to the end of the corridor. She knocked on a door, then opened it and gestured for me to step inside. The room beyond was the guildmaster's office. A large wooden desk dominated the space, with bookshelves lining the walls and wide windows stretching across the far side, letting in a soft, steady light. Sitting behind the desk was an older man, completely bald, with a long white beard that reached his chest. His face was marked with deep lines, but his eyes were sharp and calm, carrying a quiet authority. He wore simple, faded gray robes that looked more suited to a monastery than an office. And despite his age, his body appeared disciplined, as if shaped by years of training and meditation. An old monk, now serving as the guild master. He didn't carry the same obvious sense of danger as Rika, but there was a steady, grounded intensity about him. I introduced myself and explained that I was there because I had rolled a 20 on the gold die. He invited me to sit and introduced himself as Nadu, the master of Jafe's Hunters Guild. His voice was calm and deliberate, each word measured, as though he had no need to rush. He said he had already heard a bit about me, listing things in a way that made it clear word had spread quickly. A newcomer from the countryside, likely my first time in a city, no attributes, average abilities, but a vitality at the level of a hero. He even mentioned that I had managed to befriend Rika and get her to cover my fees, which he found more surprising than my test results. I admitted that I hadn't realized she had that kind of reputation, and explained that I had approached her simply because she seemed strong. He acknowledged that she was, explaining that Rika belonged to one of the guild's top 5 parties, an all-female group called Rose Thorns, and that she was particularly hostile toward men. That, more than anything, was what made my situation unusual in his eyes. Then he shifted back to my abilities. He explained that having a single ability above 20 was rare, but when it did happen, it usually didn't lead to anything remarkable. People like that often became civilians who excelled in specific fields, scholars with high intelligence or performers with high charisma, but still lived relatively normal lives. Vitality, while useful, wasn't tied to any particular profession. I asked what he meant by that, because I hadn't come this far just to be told it didn't matter. He agreed that there was more to discuss, but first he wanted to confirm my vitality. Only after that would we talk about what I could actually do, assuming I passed. He reached beneath his desk and pulled out a strange cylindrical die. Its ends were shaped like pentagonal pyramids, while its sides were made up of triangles and diamond shapes, forming a structure that felt oddly perfect, even in a world already filled with magic. He explained that this was a special die, one that could only be used once. When rolled, it would split into two, one showing the tens place and the other the ones. Then he told me to go ahead whenever I was ready, so it came down to this again. Another roll, another moment that would decide everything. I needed at least a 32 to qualify. Just the level of a dragon's health. No pressure. I rolled the die. The moment it struck the table, it cracked apart, splitting into two pieces that exploded with blinding light. Compared to the earlier dice, this was on an entirely different level. I instinctively raised my arms to shield my eyes, wincing as the brightness flooded the room. After a moment, the light faded. I blinked away the lingering glare and leaned forward to see the result. 0. 0. I froze, staring at the numbers, unable to process what I was seeing. 0. That didn't make any sense. Shouldn't I have gotten at least 20? Or was 20 just the minimum? Did that mean a 1 would have been 21? My thoughts spiraled as I tried to make sense of it. Then Nadu spoke, almost under his breath, noting that it was an actual 100. That snapped me out of it. I looked at him, trying to confirm what I had just heard. He explained that while it was technically undetermined, there likely wasn't a die large enough to measure beyond this. As far as he knew, nothing existed with an ability reaching 100. So those 3 zeros meant 100. For a moment, that felt incredible. But his tone shifted immediately, growing heavier. He told me that it was actually very bad. There were creatures in this world that fed on human vitality. Vampires, liches, banshees, and others. And to them, I would be like a feast, a walking source of immense power. And with everything else about me being so average, I wouldn't be able to defend myself. I would be easy prey. He added that there had already been recent reports of vampire and succubus attacks within the city. Then he stood up, his gaze sharpening. He admitted that, truthfully, eliminating me now would be the safest option, before something worse found me. I stopped him immediately, pointing out that I had been asking from the beginning about turning my vitality into power. If monsters could do it, then there had to be a way for me to do it too, and that would at least give me a chance to protect myself. He paused, then admitted that he wasn't going to act on that thought. Not only because he was uncertain if he even could, given the absurdity of my vitality, but also because he was required to accept my application. Technically, I met the requirements to join the guild. Still, he made it clear he wasn't pleased about it. After a moment, he sat back down. He confirmed that it was possible to convert vitality into power, but explained that such methods were typically known only to those who practiced darker arts. Even then, those individuals usually drew life force from others rather than using their own. If I wanted to learn, I would have to seek out someone like that, which came with obvious risks, since they might see me as more valuable as a resource than a person. That made sense, even if I didn't like it. As things stood, I was more useful to monsters than I was to myself. So, I asked what came next. He told me, somewhat reluctantly, that I was now officially a hunter. I could return the next day to receive my guild card, and I would start at the lowest rank, Tier 5. The rest of the details would be explained then. More importantly, he stressed that I needed to keep my situation a secret, for both my safety and everyone else's. He mentioned that he would reach out to some of the more questionable hunters in the guild to see if any of them had knowledge that could help me make use of my condition. I accepted that. So this was it. I was a hunter now. Even if the introduction had been a bit intense, I found myself looking forward to what came next. There was a quiet excitement building in my chest. A lot had happened in a single day, but for the first time it felt real. My new life had finally begun. I stood in the city square beside the guild, watching as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon. I had nowhere to stay, and since arriving in this new world, I hadn't eaten or slept once. Tonight, and probably a few more nights, I would be out on the streets. I could eat if I wanted to, but I didn't feel any real need to. The same went for sleep. That raised a quiet, unsettling question in my mind. Did I not need them anymore? And if that was the case, could I even starve to death? I began pacing as I thought it through, trying to make sense of my situation. How much could I actually heal through? Rika had said I didn't have any regeneration skills, but when she tested me with that needle, my body had pushed it out on its own through healing. That suggested something deeper. Maybe basic human healing scaled with vitality. That would explain what I experienced. But then that brought me back to the original question. Could I out-heal starvation? It should have been impossible. Food was a resource, something the body needed to function. And yet, I didn't feel hunger at all. I glanced around the square. People were heading home, most of them human, with the occasional demi-human mixed in. The city was settling into the night. I ended up speaking my thoughts out loud, more to organize them than anything else. I decided I should still eat and sleep whenever possible, because even if I didn't need them, I didn't want to lose what made me human. For now, I would rely on my vitality until I found a way to properly establish myself. With that settled, I started walking through the city, partly to pass time, and partly to find somewhere to rest. A bench, a quiet corner, anything that would get me through the night. I wasn't planning on sleeping, but resting still felt worthwhile. As I moved through the streets, I made a habit of returning to the guild square every so often, using it as a reference point since I couldn't read the local signs. If I hadn't been doing that, I might not have noticed the person following me. They were completely cloaked in black, hood pulled low, no visible features at all. By the 7th time I circled back through a small square, I had already accepted that I was being followed. I wondered what they thought of me at this point. I clearly wasn't going anywhere, but I wasn't exactly trying to shake them either. I briefly considered just stopping out in the open and confronting it. Then a loud thud broke my train of thought. I turned immediately, ready for a fight, only to see the cloaked figure lying face first on the ground behind me. I paused. I could have walked away, just kept moving and pretended I hadn't seen anything. No one would have known. But instead, I found myself lifting them and dragging them into a nearby alley, out of the main road. I propped them up against a wall and pulled back the hood. What I found was a girl. Her skin was pale and smooth, her face delicate and unblemished. Her dark red hair was long and jagged, spiking outward like barbed wire. Her figure was striking, with a narrow waist and a balanced, full silhouette that stood out even beneath her clothing. She wore a short black dress in a Victorian style, elegant yet rebellious, decorated with chains and leather straps. Thigh-high boots, a choker, and multiple ear piercings completed the look, blending gothic refinement with something more defiant. She didn't look like she was from around here, and while she appeared human at first glance, that shade of red hair didn't seem natural. Then again, I had already seen enough variety in this world to know that appearances could be deceiving. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her stomach growling. That immediately reminded me of what Nadu had said about recent vampire attacks. Could she be one? The pale skin, the red hair, it fit. Maybe she had passed out from hunger. Maybe she had been unable to find anyone to feed on. Or maybe I was overthinking it. Curiosity got the better of me. I crouched down and gently touched her face, then carefully parted her lips with my thumb. That was when I saw them. 4 fangs where her canines should have been. Long, sharp, and slightly curved inward. Not just for piercing, but for holding. Strangely enough, they looked almost delicate in their own dangerous way. I leaned in a little closer to examine them, even though I was fully aware of how questionable the situation looked. Then my finger lingered too long. A small cut. A drop of blood fell onto her tongue. I reacted instantly, but before I could pull away, her hands shot up and grabbed my arm. She was smaller than me, her fingers unable to fully wrap around my forearm, yet her grip held me in place. Her eyes fluttered open slightly, revealing a faint amber glow, and she began to feed. Her movements were slow at first, almost instinctive, as she drew in the blood. There was a strange intensity to it, a focus that made it clear she was completely absorbed in the act. My thoughts spiraled. Why was she reacting like that? Her body shifted subtly, her breathing uneven as she continued, and the entire situation felt far more intimate than I was prepared for. I couldn't make sense of it. Was she feeding, or something else? My mind struggled to process it, and my body refused to move. The closeness, the unfamiliar sensation, it was overwhelming in a way I had never experienced before. I forced myself to steady my thoughts. This was dangerous. I needed to stay focused. Time passed, longer than I expected, nearly 2 minutes before the bleeding finally stopped. That raised another question. Had my wound healed, and why had it taken that long? Did her saliva interfere with healing? If my vitality hadn't been this high, how bad would that have been? Eventually, her movements slowed. She drew back slightly, licking away the last traces before releasing me. A soft exhale escaped her, followed by a small, almost embarrassed sound. Then her eyes sharpened. Reality seemed to hit her all at once. She jerked upright, pressing herself back against the wall as her grip loosened completely. She looked at me in disbelief, clearly shaken by what had just happened, struggling to process the fact that she had fed from a human, and that I was still standing in front of her. I gave a small, uncertain greeting, raising my hand slightly. She stared, then glanced down at my finger, still marked by what had just happened. Her face flushed deeply. She began trying to explain herself in a rush, insisting that she had only been hungry, that it had been a long time, and that she had been starving. I listened, trying to piece together what that meant. A vampire that didn't normally feed on humans. That alone was unusual. But more importantly, vampires used blood as a source of power, and that meant this was an opportunity. I interrupted gently, acknowledging what she was, but then asked if she could teach me blood magic. Everything stopped. Her expression shifted instantly, her eyes narrowing as she focused entirely on me. The air grew tense, and a dagger formed in her hand, dark and fluid, like solidified blood. I realized immediately that I had moved too fast. She had been shocked that I survived. Combined with how her saliva slowed my healing, it was clear that feeding usually ended differently for her victims. And I had just asked her to teach me that. I quickly told her to wait and let me explain. She had already begun to rise, the dagger positioned between us. I pointed out that she had just fed on me and that I could have died, so it was only fair she at least hear me out. She countered immediately, arguing that I had been the one to put my finger in her mouth while she was unconscious, and that any consequences would have been my own fault. That was fair. Still, I explained that I wouldn't have died, and considering she had been following me and collapsed from hunger, I had effectively helped her. That made things even. She hesitated. I could see her considering it. She had been starving, and despite everything, I had given her blood, and survived. Finally, she agreed to hear me out, though she made it clear that she didn't owe me anything. I let out a quiet breath of relief as the tension eased slightly. Then I explained. I told her I had no intention of using other people's blood, and that if she taught me, I would only ever use my own. In exchange, she could continue feeding from me. Her expression shifted again, this time from guarded to confused. That was progress. I decided to introduce myself properly. I told her my name was Leon. After a brief pause, she gave hers. Valeria, I explained my situation as clearly as I could, keeping it simple so I wouldn't lose her unnecessary details. I told her I wanted to become a hunter, but I had no affinity for chi, magic, or essence, and all I really had was an overwhelming amount of vitality. So if she could teach me how to use that vitality for blood magic, it would solve everything. I could feel my own excitement as I said it, but Valeria just stared at me, completely stunned. She questioned how I could be so calm about everything. I didn't immediately understand what she meant, so I asked her to clarify. That only seemed to frustrate her more, as she pointed out the obvious. I was talking to a vampire who had just fed on me, and instead of reacting with fear, anger, or even basic caution, I was acting like it was normal. From my perspective, though, it really did feel like something out of a story. I straightened slightly and raised my hands, adding a bit of dramatic flair as I described it. A beautiful vampire, starving because she refused to harm humans, finally reaching her limit, only to meet someone she could feed from without causing harm. Then I dropped the theatrics, still smiling as I returned to a more grounded tone. On a practical level, it worked out perfectly. She could feed without guilt, and I could learn blood magic. It was a fair exchange. She called me unreasonable, clearly unsure how to process me at all. Even so, I could see hesitation in her expression, mixed with something else. The fact that she could feed safely from me, and that she had already experienced it, clearly affected her. She admitted she needed time to think, and asked me to tell her more about myself. That caught me off guard for a moment, but I didn't mind. If anything, I found it a little endearing how cautious she still was, even though she was more than capable of overpowering me if she wanted. I sat down against the wall, settling into a more relaxed posture. I started with the basics, explaining that I had arrived in the city that very morning, and since I had no money, I had just been walking around in circles to pass the time and get through the night. She sat down as well, keeping a small distance between us, listening quietly. I continued, mentioning that before this, I had been at the Hunters Guild. I had technically passed the exam, which meant I was now a hunter, but without any attributes. I was still essentially just human. She picked up on that immediately, connecting it back to what I had said earlier about my vitality. She understood that my score must have been high enough to carry me through the test, and she seemed surprised that there was no strict requirement for attributes. I told her it surprised me too, but apparently, it was allowed. And as she could see, my vitality was high enough to keep me alive even after what had just happened. She observed that I did seem unusually energetic, and asked if I felt tired at all. I answered honestly that I didn't. From there, she summarized my situation in her own words. With no attributes, my only real path forward was to learn blood arts and use my own vitality as a resource. I repeated the term quietly to myself, letting it settle. Then I added that I hadn't originally been thinking specifically of vampires when I considered this path. In fact, the guildmaster had warned me to avoid creatures like vampires since they could use my vitality for themselves. She pointed out, almost dryly, that she had followed me in the middle of the night anyway. I acknowledged that, noting that she was now fully up to speed. After a brief pause, she shifted the conversation again, asking about my life before today. That was a problem. I couldn't exactly tell her I was from another world, especially when she was already uncertain about trusting me. So I defaulted to something safe, listing small, ordinary things about myself. My favorite color, the kinds of food I liked. Even as I said it, I could tell how awkward it sounded. It felt like one of those forced introductions on the first day of school. She tilted her head slightly, clearly unimpressed, and pointed out that it wasn't what she meant. I admitted that I didn't know what else to say and asked if there was something more specific she wanted to know. She explained that it wasn't about being interesting, but about understanding who she was dealing with. She mentioned that she wasn't exactly welcome anywhere and hadn't had a friendly interaction in a long time. That shifted the tone. I let out a quiet breath, realizing I had been approaching this too lightly. I admitted that I understood her caution, and at the same time, I found it strange how little caution I was showing myself. The guildmaster had described me as something that monsters would seek out, and yet here I was, speaking with confidence in a situation that should have been far more dangerous. It didn't match who I used to be. I had always been quiet, reserved, someone who avoided standing out. But now, I was acting differently. I paused, thinking it through as I spoke. I told her that I had recently come close to death, and now I was here, alone in a completely new place with nothing tying me down. No family, no home, nothing to return to. And because of that, something had shifted. I felt lighter, in a way. Less afraid, not fearless exactly, but different enough that even I was still trying to understand it. She listened carefully, and I could see that something in what I said resonated with her. She commented that my situation sounded just as difficult as hers, maybe even worse, yet I was handling it surprisingly well. I had a brief moment of concern, wondering if that came across the wrong way, but before I could respond, she muttered something under her breath. Fateful encounter. Then she straightened, her expression firming into something more decisive. She agreed to the deal. She stated it clearly, almost formally, that I would become her source of food, and in return, she would teach me blood arts. That was all I needed to hear. I stood up immediately, unable to hide my excitement as I asked when we would start and what I needed to do. Already eager to begin. She quickly told me to calm down, reminding me that this wasn't something I should be announcing out loud. If word got out, I would be targeted before I even had a chance to establish myself. As she said that, I noticed movement at the edges of the alley. 2 cloaked figures had appeared, one at each end, effectively cutting off any way out. I couldn't help but comment on the timing. Valeria stood up beside me, shifting into a defensive stance as she formed the same crimson dagger in her hand. She clarified that they weren't after me, but after her. These were assassins who had been tracking her. As I watched, blood began to flow from their hands, rising into the air and shaping itself into weapons. The liquid twisted and condensed into thin, elegant blades, rapiers made entirely of crimson, with fluid handles that continued to move like living streams. So these were the ones behind the recent attacks. While Valeria had been starving herself and running, they had been feeding freely. I raised my fists instinctively, settling into a stance as I prepared myself. It seemed my first lesson was about to begin. Valeria shut the idea down immediately, saying there would be no lesson, not here, not now, and that I was still just a human while she couldn't take both of them on. We needed to escape. I stood back to back with her as the 2 vampire assassins closed in, each cloaked in dark robes and wielding a crimson rapier formed from their own blood. I pointed out that escape wasn't exactly simple when both exits were blocked. Even as I spoke, I kept observing. Valeria's dagger was made of solidified blood, but theirs was different. The handles and guards still flowed like liquid. That suggested a more advanced technique, or maybe just a greater supply of blood to manipulate. Either way, I didn't have enough information to fully understand it. I forced myself to focus. If we couldn't win, then we had to break through. I asked her if she had any mobility options. Wall running, flight, anything. But she admitted she didn't have enough blood left. And with me there, the situation was worse. Her voice carried a hint of panic. That wasn't good. Before I could respond, the assassins attacked. They thrust their rapiers even from a distance, and as they did, the blades extended, more hardened blood forming along the weapon, increasing both reach and speed. I reacted instantly, warning her and shoving her aside. The attack struck me instead. Both blades pierced into me, but only a few inches before bending and shattering. Fragments of crimson scattered outward, still carrying the force of the impact. They hadn't realized what had just happened. My healing had limited the depth of the wounds, and because the attacks came from opposite directions, their momentum had canceled out, causing the blades to break apart violently. The moment of shock was all I needed. I grabbed Valeria's hand and ran, pulling her toward the city square. Behind us, the vampires were already reforming their weapons. As I moved, a thought clicked into place. They didn't feel like true assassins, more like hired killers. I shifted direction slightly and charged straight toward the one blocking our path, placing myself between him and Valeria as he thrust again. This time, the blade lodged into my chest. Right on cue, the second attack came from behind. Without turning, I pulled Valeria in front of me and held her close, bracing myself as the second strike hit my back. It was stronger than the first, but still not enough to fully overcome my healing. With nothing countering the force this time, we were both sent tumbling out of the alley and into the open square. I hit the ground hard, but I recovered quickly, pushing myself up and helping Valeria to her feet. I mentioned that I had suspected they weren't professionals, and asked if she had a bounty on her. She deflected the question, asking instead what made me think they weren't trained assassins. That was answer enough. I let it go for now. I explained my reasoning anyway. If they were true assassins, they would have attacked from above, or used stealth. Instead, they had blocked exits and relied on direct confrontation. Effective, but not subtle. And after being caught off guard once, they were likely to fall back on the same extended thrust technique. Right on cue, they stepped out of the alley, calmly reforming their weapons and even licking the blades as they approached. I couldn't help but comment on how excessive that was. At the same time, I noted that they had probably realized I had some form of healing, especially since vampires possessed anti-healing properties in their saliva. I kept analyzing. Would they keep using the same attack? It extended their range, but it likely consumed blood. Out here in the open, we had more room to dodge, but they still had the advantage in reach. I glanced behind us and pointed out that the Hunters Guild was nearby and also functioned as an inn, but Valeria immediately rejected the idea. As a vampire, she would be attacked on sight. The 2 assassins advanced slowly, positioning themselves carefully but not fully surrounding us yet. I considered retreating deeper into the alleys. It would limit their long-range attacks, but if we got trapped in a dead end, we would be finished. There really weren't many options left. I started to say as much. And then it happened. A sudden, heavy impact. Everything slowed. I had hesitated too long. The extended rapier pierced straight through my chest, passing through my heart and out my back. Without my healing bracing against it in time, I could feel just how powerful the attack truly was. My hand moved instinctively, gripping the blade. But even then, I couldn't break it. For a brief moment, a thought crossed my mind. Was this it? Even with everything I had, could I still be taken down in a single strike? Valeria was holding on to me, saying something, but I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was my heartbeat. It wasn't slowing, it was accelerating. Each beat struck like a piston, forceful and relentless, driving something through me. With every pulse, vibrations traveled through the blade like metal clashing against metal. No, I refused to let it end like this. No more hesitation, no more doubt. I didn't have the strength to break the blade, but I had something else. Vitality. I released my grip, clenched my fists, and drew my arms in, tightening every muscle in my body. Then I forced everything forward. My chest flexed, and the blade shattered outward, the break traveling back along it like a chain reaction. My healing surged from within, strongest at my core, overpowering the anti-healing effect even as the outer wound still bled. I steadied myself, locking eyes with the two vampires as adrenaline surged through me. This wasn't over. I stepped forward, fists clenched, voice steady but sharp as I challenged them, asking if that was the best they could do. That felt incredible. Maybe it was just the adrenaline, but in that moment, I felt unstoppable. Valeria didn't want to head to the Hunters Guild, so running around without direction wasn't going to help. There was only one option left: fight. I told her they were after her, so I would take them head on while she focused on attacking from a distance. She was still shaken from what had just happened. I had taken a hit that should have ended me, and then shattered a blood-formed blade as if it were fragile. Her eyes were still wet, but she forced herself to concentrate. She explained that vampires didn't usually rely on long-range attacks because it consumed too much blood. I told her I would make up for that afterward, and urged her to use everything she had. Then I moved. I sprinted toward the two vampires, and they rushed toward me in response. She tried to call out, but by then it was already too late to hesitate. They were faster. The distance between us vanished almost instantly, and the one whose weapon I had shattered earlier took the lead. Charging in with his fists raised, he launched into a high kick aimed at my head. I brought my arms up just in time, but the force still broke through my guard. Without stopping, he landed, spun, and drove a second kick straight into my stomach, sending me crashing to the ground. Before I could recover, the second vampire followed up, leaping over the first and driving his rapier down in a plunging strike that pierced directly through my heart. I reacted without fear this time, pushing through the pain as I flexed my chest again, shattering the blade from within. Then, without wasting a moment, I grabbed one of the shards and drove it into his forearm. At the same time, Valeria moved. She raised her hand toward the sky as blood flowed upward along her arm, defying gravity. Dozens of droplets gathered above her, suspended like glowing red stars. Then she completed her technique. The droplets hardened into sharp spikes before raining down in a wide, fast barrage. They struck the ground in a sweeping wave, piercing through both vampires despite their attempts to evade. As for me, I was still on the ground, completely covered. Instinct had made me shield my face, but the rest of my body was riddled with spikes. So much for avoiding long-range attacks. Valeria collapsed after releasing everything she had into that strike, leaving the rest to me. That wasn't good. The two vampires had already begun recovering. Their ability to heal was clear, though the strain was starting to show. It was wasteful, but undeniably effective. I needed to end this quickly. I pushed myself up and rushed the vampire who had been standing over me earlier. The name came out before I could think of anything better. Porcupine Hug. It was crude, but it fit. Still covered in spikes, I grabbed him and pulled him in tightly. Between the force of the hold and my own healing pushing the spikes outward, they drove deeper into him. He cried out in pain and shoved me away, trying to force his blood to seal the damage, but it was too late. He didn't have enough left, and the bleeding overwhelmed him as he collapsed. That left one. I assessed the situation quickly. If he fed on me, I lost. If he grabbed Valeria and escaped, I lost. If I forced him to retreat, I won. If I took him down, I won. I met his gaze and told him plainly that he was outmatched, and that he could leave or face the consequences. My best chance was to make him back off. If he retreated, I could help Valeria recover and prepare for whatever came next. For a moment it seemed like he might consider it. Then, I saw the resolve in his eyes. He wasn't leaving. He charged again, slower than before but still faster than me. This time he opened with a left hook. I raised my arms to block, but once again the difference in strength broke through. A right uppercut followed, then two quick strikes to my nose. Each impact hurt, but the damage vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. At that point, I stopped trying to block. The pain was real, but it didn't matter. Every strike he threw cost him blood, and in a battle of endurance, I wasn't the one who would run out first. I focused on one thing. Eventually, he would try to bite me. That was the one attack I couldn't allow. The barrage continued. Punches, kicks, but they no longer sent me flying. I held my ground, maintaining eye contact, steady and unshaken. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. I stood between him and Valeria, unmoving. When the moment came, I saw it. He set it up with a left uppercut, then drove an elbow into my stomach, positioning himself perfectly to go for my neck. As his fangs came down, I struck first. A clean uppercut snapped his head back, forcing his jaw shut before he could bite. He retreated, putting distance between us. For a moment, I thought he might finally run. Then everything changed. A short blade pierced through his heart from behind, cutting cleanly through his blood burst outward. The weapon looked like a wakizashi, and the force behind it carried through with a sharp gust of wind. The vampire tried to retaliate, swinging backward, but the attacker had already moved. Rika. She balanced effortlessly, using her blade as a pivot point while avoiding his strike. Her movements precise and controlled. As the vampire collapsed, she spoke calmly, as if stating something obvious. Vampires stored their blood in their hearts and could recover from most injuries, even direct strikes to that area. I noticed immediately that Rika wasn't in perfect condition. Her breathing was slightly uneven, and her body carried fresh scars and bruises, signs of whatever she had just come from. Even so, she continued calmly, explaining that since vampires stored their blood in their hearts, targeting that area was the most effective way to drain their reserves. I called out to her, relieved to see her again. She greeted me casually, calling me farm boy as usual, and admitted she was impressed that I had managed to hold my own against 3 vampires. I agreed without hesitation. Then I paused. 3? Before I could fully process that, she stated that she would finish off the girl, saying it was too risky to leave a vampire alive. I stepped in immediately, stopping her and telling her that Valeria was actually my friend. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her eyes locked onto me, and her voice sharpened with anger as she questioned me. She reminded me that she had warned me to be less trusting, and now I had gone and befriended a vampire. I tried to explain, telling her that Valeria was different, that she was vegan. That only made things worse. She questioned what that even meant, and pointed out how easily I had accepted it. From her perspective, it was absurd. I admitted that it sounded strange, but I didn't think Valeria had been lying. She countered immediately, stating that vampires fed on humans, and that deception would be second nature to them. To her, Valeria wasn't just dangerous. She was a monster, something that only looked human. I responded without thinking too much about it, pointing out that Rika herself killed people, yet I trusted her. That caught her off guard. For a brief moment, she froze, and I noticed a faint shift in her expression, a hint of color rising to her cheeks. She dismissed it quickly, though, explaining that it was different. I could trust her because she was herself, but that didn't mean I should trust others so easily, including her. I understood what she was saying, but I didn't back down. I told her that I had felt the same kind of presence from Valeria as I had from her, and that was enough for me. I trusted that instinct. I also explained that Valeria had already agreed to teach me blood arts, and in exchange I would feed her. She seemed to genuinely have an issue with harming humans, which was why she described herself the way she did. Rika paused, then asked if I had already fed her. I confirmed it. Her expression shifted again, this time to something closer to disbelief. I told her I would wake Valeria up so she could evaluate her properly. Then she asked if I had passed the hunter exam. Her tone had softened completely, and there was something else there, something almost apologetic. I told her that I had, that I was officially a hunter now. With that settled, I walked over to Valeria, who was still unconscious. I knew I had to feed her again, but this time Rika was watching. I hesitated for a moment. Surely it wouldn't be the same as before. I knelt down and carefully placed my finger in Valeria's mouth again. Her fangs pierced my skin, and as the blood began to flow, she reacted immediately. Her hands wrapped around my forearm, and she began feeding again with the same intensity as before. Her movements were just as instinctive, her body responding in ways that made the situation feel far more personal than it should have. I could feel Rika's gaze on my back, sharp and unrelenting. She asked if this was the reason I trusted her. Her tone carried more irritation than anger, as if she was holding something back. After what felt like a long stretch of time, Valeria finally opened her eyes. She looked up at me, her expression soft and unfocused, and noted that I had won. Her hand still held my arm, but now her grip was gentle, almost careful. That moment didn't last. Rika moved instantly, striking me in the side with enough force to send me away from Valeria. Before I could recover, she had already positioned herself between us, her blade pointed directly at Valeria. She demanded to know who she was. I tried to introduce them properly, but Rika ignored me and kept her focus on Valeria. Valeria, to her credit, remained composed. She acknowledged that she would go along with it, recognizing that Rika was someone I trusted, and introduced herself simply as Valeria. Rika pressed further, demanding her full name. Valeria refused, explaining that she had abandoned her family and no longer used that name. That only made Rika more aggressive in her questioning. She asked how much Valeria had taken, what would have happened if she hadn't stopped, whether she could even stop, and whether she had truly been unconscious at all. It was a relentless interrogation. I thought about stepping in, but before I could say anything, Rika cut me off, pointing out that if I trusted Valeria, then I should let her answer. If there was nothing to hide, then there shouldn't be a problem. Despite the pressure, Valeria answered honestly. She admitted she didn't know how much she had taken. She had been unconscious, and to her I had felt like an endless source. If she hadn't stopped, she didn't know what would have happened. Vampires didn't naturally stop. They fed until interrupted or until nothing remained. The only reason she had stopped was because my wound had closed. Her voice remained steady, even though what she was saying clearly wasn't easy for her. Rika didn't ease up. She continued questioning her, asking about her behavior, her intentions, and why she was even in the city. Valeria pushed back slightly, denying any intentional manipulation, and explaining that my blood simply tasted unusually good. She dismissed it lightly, saying she would get used to it eventually. Then she stated her purpose. She had left her family and had been on the run for 2 years, arriving here only a few days ago. As for her name, she reaffirmed that she was simply Valeria, nothing more. Rika studied her for a moment, then finally lowered her blade. She admitted that she still didn't trust her, and that there were more questions to ask, but she didn't have time. She needed me, and she had already delayed too long. She told Valeria to stay put, and made it clear she wouldn't allow her to contact me again until she was satisfied. That caught me off guard. I asked why she needed me. Her expression shifted again, that same hint of guilt returning. She answered simply that she did. I tried to suggest that Valeria could come with us, but Rika refused immediately, saying it was something personal and that Valeria would have to wait. The two of them exchanged tense looks again. Valeria agreed to stay, though she pointed out that she might have questions of her own and that trust went both ways. Rika responded by saying she could already tell Valeria was lying and warned her not to follow. It was clear this wasn't going to resolve on its own, so I stepped between them, cutting through the tension. I suggested that I would go with Rika for now, and afterward we could regroup, maybe over breakfast, and sort everything out. Then I asked how long it would take. She didn't give a clear answer, only saying we should move quickly. Before I could say anything else, she grabbed my hand. As she turned, she met Valeria's gaze one last time, giving her a small, confident smile while still holding on to me. Then she pulled me along, breaking into a run as she led me away from the busy center of the city. As we moved, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. She asked if I trusted her. Rika led me quickly toward the outer parts of the city, where the dense clusters of buildings gradually gave way to larger homes with wide-open plots of land. As we moved, she asked if I trusted her. I answered that I did, but I couldn't help asking if this was about Valeria, or if it had something to do with the guilt she had been carrying. She muttered that if someone like me could pick up on that, then she was losing her edge. That only made me more curious, so I asked what kind of favor she needed that had been bothering her so much. She paused, clearly thinking it over. Then she said she had originally planned to tell me and give me a chance to back out, but now, considering my new vampire friend, she had changed her mind. She wasn't going to tell me anymore. I stared at her, trying to process that. So she was asking me for a favor while refusing to explain it. I asked why she had suddenly decided not to tell me, and she simply reminded me that I said I trusted her, so I should trust her. I tried asking for at least a hint. She refused. At that point, I couldn't tell if she was upset, annoyed, or something else entirely. Her behavior didn't line up cleanly with anything I could read. Before I could press further, she stopped. We had arrived. In front of us stood a large, ornate manor. A carved stone fence surrounded the property, high enough that only the upper floors were visible from the outside. A heavy metal gate marked the entrance, and beyond it, neatly arranged flower beds lined a circular carriage path leading to the front doors. I couldn't help but react. The place looked impressive. I asked if she lived there. She answered simply that she didn't. Then she pushed the gate open and pulled me inside, closing it behind us, before continuing toward the entrance. I asked again why we were here, but she didn't respond. Inside, the manor was empty. The candles had been extinguished, but faint trails of smoke still rose from them, suggesting whoever had been here had only recently left. Despite that, everything was well maintained. She didn't slow down, pulling me deeper into the building and then down into the basement, still holding my hand as we descended. Before we reached the bottom, I could hear voices, 2 women arguing. One insisted they had no choice, warning that even if the person in question resisted, the king would kill them all. If he found out, the other argued back, saying they couldn't force her, that she had already endured this long, and that they should focus on finding another solution. A third voice added that they were searching through books, but this wasn't something people just casually dealt with. We stepped into the room. There were 3 women inside, all bearing fresh injuries, just like Rika. This had to be her party. Rose thorns. One was a wizard woman holding a tall wooden staff topped with a glowing blue crystal in her right hand. Another was a blonde in full knight's armor. The last is dressed in forest green clothing with long, wavy reddish-brown hair and pointed ears. Rika announced our arrival, casually mentioning that she had brought along a farm boy. One of them immediately responded that Rika was thinking ahead, implying sacrifices would be necessary. That word caught my attention. Sacrifices. So that was it. She had brought me here because she thought I could survive whatever they were planning. I couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and annoyance. The armored knight stepped forward, her expression filled with restrained anger as she confronted Rika. She accused her of letting her personal issues with men influence her decisions, saying that didn't justify sacrificing someone. Rika cut her off quickly, telling her to calm down and clarifying that I wasn't just some random person. She introduced me as a hunter, explained that she had helped me join the guild, and that she had witnessed my test results. Then she described me as completely useless in every aspect except one, my vitality. She said it was at least on a level of a dragon. The knight questioned that. Rika explained that before she left for her raid, I had rolled a 20 in vitality, and since I had no other strengths, I would have needed at least a 32 to pass. The knight turned her attention to me. I hesitated. There was no point hiding it. Rika would find out eventually, and after everything that had already happened, secrecy didn't seem practical. So I told them. I had a vitality of 100. Even then, it wasn't fully confirmed since there wasn't a die large enough to measure beyond that. The room fell silent. That was when it really started to sink in. There was a saying I remembered. 90 was halfway to 100. It was used to illustrate how exponential growth worked, how the gap between values widened more and more, and Rika had already told me that each level increased in difference. So what did 100 actually mean? Trying to make it sound less overwhelming, I added that I should be able to help with whatever problem they were dealing with. The silence didn't lift. Shock, disbelief, doubt. It was all there. Rika was the first to recover, trying to move things forward, but the others immediately interrupted her, rejecting the idea outright. They couldn't accept something like that so easily. Rika pushed back, insisting that I wasn't lying. She reminded them that she had seen my role herself, and that when she came back to find me, she had witnessed me feeding a vampire. She even mentioned that the same vampire had followed us and was currently waiting outside. That caught my attention. So Valeria had followed us after all. Meanwhile, the 3 of them remained silent, clearly struggling to reconcile everything. They knew Rika could read people, and they knew what vampires were capable of. But even that wasn't enough to make this believable. I glanced at Rika and asked what the plan was now. She answered without hesitation. They would let the others calm down, and in the meantime, she would chain me to a chair and blindfold me. I paused. That was not what I expected. I couldn't help but question it. Before I could question it any further, Rika was already tying me to a chair. She had brought me into what looked like a cellar in the basement. No windows, just a single door. The other 3 members of her party stood near the entrance, watching quietly as they tried to process everything that had just happened. I couldn't help but comment on it. So this favor she needed was for me to act as food for some kind of monster girl. She confirmed it without hesitation, as casual as ever. That explained the guilt I had noticed earlier, especially after the way she reacted to me and Valeria. She asked if I really had to say everything out loud, and I admitted that I did. If nothing else, I figured I could at least give her a hard time for dragging me into this without explaining anything. Her eyebrow lifted at that, and she fired back immediately, pointing out that I wasn't exactly in a position to joke after willingly letting myself get tied to a chair. She tightened the ropes a little more than necessary, a playful edge in her expression. I acknowledged it with a quick apology, though neither of us really meant it. A quiet laugh broke the exchange. The knight, Rosalind, stepped forward, having watched the whole interaction. She commented that she was surprised to see Rika getting along so well with a man, considering her usual attitude. She added that she sometimes worried Rika might react harshly if a man said the wrong thing. Yet here we were, talking like this. From her tone, it sounded like she was teasing Rika about being unusually fond of me. Rika dismissed it quickly, calling me nothing special and reminding everyone that she had already stabbed me earlier, as if that proved she hadn't softened at all. That seemed to raise a different kind of concern in Rosalind's expression, but she didn't dwell on it. Instead, she turned to me and introduced herself properly. She explained that she was Rosalind, a paladin and the leader of Rose Thorns. She gestured to the others, Circe the wizard and Tala the druid. I acknowledged them, noting their small gestures in return. Then Rosalind shifted to the main point. She emphasized that their friend needed my help, and that along with everything else they were asking, she wanted me to avoid asking personal questions. I understood immediately why she was the leader. She had a composed presence that made it difficult to refuse, even if I had wanted to. I agreed, though I did ask one thing. I wanted to know what kind of monster their friend was. The room fell silent for a moment. Then she answered, a succubus. I felt a strange sense of excitement at first, almost reflexive, but that didn't last. She immediately clarified the situation. Their friend had been captured by succubi only a few days ago, and during that time she had somehow been turned into one of them. That changed everything. I thought it through. Succubi were all female, which meant they likely created more of their kind by transforming others. Rosalind continued, her tone growing sharper with anger. Their friend had been targeted because of her nature, someone noble, someone pure. The demons had even given her the key to her own cage, letting her suffer while waiting for her to give in. And despite all of that, she had resisted. She had chosen to starve rather than lose herself and harm others. That realization settled heavily. I had been too quick to associate succubi with the lighter versions I had seen in stories. The reality here was far harsher. I expressed concern, asking if she would be able to feed on me safely. I knew I wouldn't die, but that didn't mean there wouldn't be consequences. Rosalind explained that was exactly why I was being restrained. By tying me down, I wouldn't be able to interfere or do anything that might weaken her resolve. A simple kiss would be enough for her to feed. By then, Rika had finished securing the ropes. She stated that there was no backing out now, and that once the blindfold was on, everything would be ready. Rosalind gave Rika one last look before turning to leave, saying she would go speak with their friend. Circe and Tala followed shortly after, leaving just the two of us in the room. The atmosphere shifted. I wasn't entirely sure what to say. There was something undefined between us. I couldn't clearly label what my relationship with Rika was, but I knew that if there was a possibility of it becoming something more, I wouldn't be against it. Before I could figure out how to approach it, she spoke first. She told me not to be misled by Rosalind's teasing, and then explained what succubi actually were. They were demons that preyed on desire, and death at their hands was anything but peaceful. That wiped away any lingering misconceptions I had. I admitted that I had misunderstood, and that the reality made a lot more sense now. She laughed at my reaction, then added that I would likely have to get used to this if they couldn't find a way to cure their friend. I made a mental note to reconsider how quickly I trusted people, especially when she asked me that question earlier. She told me to stop talking. Then she leaned in. Her face came close, her eyes meeting mine, and I caught a faint blush paired with a genuine smile. It was the last thing I saw before she covered my eyes with the blindfold. Darkness. Silence followed. I wondered if she had already left, but I hadn't heard her move, not even the door. I called out to her, but there was no response. She really was skilled. Then I felt it, a soft warmth against my lips. It was brief, almost fleeting, but unmistakable. A light kiss that lingered just enough